I watched them across the restaurant, laughing together over expensive champagne. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband as of next week, leaned in close to whisper something in his secretary's ear, her giggle echoing through the upscale steakhouse as the diamond bracelet he'd bought her caught the light. The irony? I had hired her 6 years ago. While they sipped champagne, unaware, they didn't know Morrison Enterprises wasn't Nathan's to give away. As the overlooked co-founder holding 51% of the shares, I, Rebecca Chen, would make that clear, starting tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Another glass of Cabernet, Ms. Morrison? I turned to find Marco, the longtime bartender at Elysium, offering the bottle of my favorite red. The dim lighting of the bar area provided the perfect vantage point to observe Nathan and Veronica without being spotted. Thank you, Marco. I accepted the wine with steady hands despite the storm raging inside me. And please, it's Rebecca now. I'm reverting to my maiden name soon. Of course, Ms. Rebecca. He nodded discreetly, his eyes briefly flicking toward Nathan's table. Their reservation was made just an hour ago. I thought you should know. I smiled slightly. Your loyalty never goes unnoticed, Marco. I took a measured sip of the rich Cabernet. 15 years of marriage, and Nathan still hadn't realized that his favorite restaurant staff had always preferred me. Small details like remembering birthdays, asking about family members, and leaving generous tips had built me a network of allies Nathan had never bothered to cultivate. People were assets to him, nothing more. My phone vibrated with a text from Caroline, my college roommate and now corporate attorney. Everything set for tomorrow. Final documents signed. Legal team briefed. Are you sure about this? I typed back. Quickly, absolutely. No second thoughts. When I looked up, I caught Veronica gazing adoringly at Nathan as he ordered for her without asking what she wanted, the same controlling habit I'd endured for years. She was 29 to my 42. With a manufactured pout and strategic intelligence I'd initially mistaken for actual business acumen when I hired her 3 years ago. I'd been impressed by her resume and references, all of which I later discovered had been carefully fabricated. What hadn't been fabricated was her talent for making herself indispensable to powerful men. Nathan had fallen for it completely. Rebecca? My God, it is you! I turned to find Michael Chen, an old friend and business journalist, approaching my corner of the bar. I stood to embrace him, genuinely pleased by the unexpected encounter. Michael, what brings you to Elysium on a Tuesday night? Meeting a source for that tech industry expose I'm working on. But the more interesting question is what brings you here? His eyes darted to where Nathan and Veronica sat, then back to me, concern evident. Please tell me this isn't some fatal attraction scenario I'm witnessing. I laughed softly. Nothing so dramatic. I'm not here to cause a scene. Good, because surveillance and stalking aren't your style, he said, sliding onto the bar stool beside me. Though I wouldn't blame you after what he pulled. Michael had been covering the tech industry for the Wall Street Journal for nearly 2 decades. He'd interviewed Nathan and me multiple times as Morrison Enterprises grew from a promising startup to an industry leader in data security solutions. The tech world considered Nathan the visionary founder, and me, the supportive wife who handled the soft aspects of the business, HR, culture, community relations. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that the initial algorithm that had launched our flagship product had been my creation. How are you holding up? Michael asked, his voice softening. The industry rumors are flying, especially with that TechCrunch article about Nathan positioning Veronica for an executive role. I've been better, I admitted, but after tomorrow I'll be just fine. Michael's eyebrows rose. That sounds intriguing. Care to share with an old friend who promises to keep it off the record? At least until you give the green light? I considered this. Michael had always been fair in his reporting about our company. More importantly, he'd been one of the few journalists who had sought my input equally alongside Nathan's. "How about an exclusive interview on Thursday?" I offered. "After the dust settles." His eyes lit up. "That good, huh? You've got yourself a deal." As we caught up on safer topics, I kept one eye on Nathan's table. He was talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands the way he did when explaining his visionary concepts to potential investors, concepts that often began as my ideas before he repackaged them as his own. Veronica leaned forward, utterly captivated by his performance. I remembered being that enthralled once, back when we were graduate students at MIT. Nathan had been brilliant, ambitious, and charismatic, the perfect counterpart to my methodical, behind-the-scenes nature. Our skills had complemented each other perfectly when we launched Morrison Enterprises from our cramped apartment's second bedroom. "Have you seen the latest valuation numbers?" Michael asked, pulling me from my thoughts. "Your company's projected to hit $3 billion after that government contract announcement." "I'm aware," I said, taking another sip of wine. "The timing couldn't be better." "For the divorce, you mean?" "Among other things." What neither Nathan nor most of the tech world remembered was that Morrison Enterprises had been incorporated on our first anniversary. Nathan had presented the ownership paperwork as a gift, insisting I take majority ownership for tax purposes. At the time, I'd thought it was a romantic gesture symbolizing our partnership. Years later, I realized he'd done it as a liability shield during the company's precarious early days. "He's an idiot, you know," Michael said, following my gaze to Nathan's table. "Trading a genuine partner for a yes woman half your IQ. That's kind of you, but intelligence had nothing to do with his decision." I set down my glass. "Veronica makes him feel important. She never challenges his ideas or points out the flaws in his logic. She laughs at his jokes and strokes his ego. After 15 years, I'd stopped performing those services." Michael snorted. "Heaven forbid a business partner expects substance over validation." I watched as Nathan signaled for the check, his hand possessively covering Veronica's on the table. A diamond ring glinted on her finger, larger than the one he'd given me, of course. They weren't officially engaged yet, but the intention was clear to anyone paying attention. "They're leaving," I murmured, turning slightly away to avoid being spotted. "Want me to create a distraction? Spill a drink on him? Trip accidentally on purpose?" Michael offered with a mischievous grin. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "Tempting, but unnecessary. Tomorrow will provide all the satisfaction I need." After Nathan and Veronica departed, I finished my wine and checked the time. It was nearly 10 p.m., and I had an early start tomorrow. "I should head out," I told Michael. "Board meeting preparations." He stood when I did. "I'll walk you to your car." Outside in the cool September air, Michael hesitated. "Rebecca, whatever you're planning, just be careful. Nathan might not be as brilliant as he thinks, but he's always been ruthless when cornered. I appreciate the concern, but I've considered every angle. This has been in motion for months." "Well, I can't wait to hear all about it on Thursday. Good luck." I drove home to the downtown loft I'd moved into after moving out of our family home in the suburbs. Nathan had wanted to keep the house, claiming it had been primarily his investment. He'd forgotten that my inheritance from my grandmother had paid for the down payment. The loft was smaller but suited me better, open concept with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, walking distance to my favorite cafes and the art museum where I served on the board. It reflected who I was without Nathan's influence, without the compromise that had defined our marriage. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As I prepared for bed, I laid out my outfit for the next day. A tailored charcoal suit I'd never worn before, purchased specifically for tomorrow's meeting. The last time I'd attended a board meeting had been nearly 8 months ago, before Nathan had suggested I focus on other interests, while he and Veronica handled the day-to-day operations. What he'd really meant was, "Your presence makes my flirtation with my secretary awkward. Please make yourself scarce." I'd complied, using the time to work with Caroline on the legal strategy for what we were now calling Project Restoration. The name had been her idea, because we're restoring the company to its rightful leadership, she'd explained. My phone rang. Alicia's name flashed on the screen, my younger sister calling from London. "It's midnight there," I answered. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" "As if I could sleep before your big day," she replied. "I'm too excited. Please tell me you'll FaceTime me right after the meeting so I can see your face when you describe the look on Nathan's face." Alicia had never warmed to Nathan, even before the affair. "There's something calculating behind that charm," she'd warned me years ago. I should have listened. I promised to call, but it might not be until evening your time. There will be a lot to handle tomorrow. "Worth the wait," she said. "Are you nervous?" I considered the question. Not nervous, just ready for it to be done. "Good. Because you've earned this moment. Remember what Dad always said. The best revenge is massive success," I finished with her. Our father, a self-made entrepreneur, who'd built and lost several businesses before finally succeeding, had instilled that philosophy in us. Exactly. And make sure you wear that power suit I helped you pick out. The one that makes you look like you could destroy a man with a single, raised eyebrow. Already laid out and ready. After we hung up, I reviewed my presentation one final time. The slides were concise, the financial data devastating in its clarity. I'd documented everything, the gradual siphoning of company resources for Nathan's personal projects, the inflated expense reports, the questionable hiring decisions that had brought in several of Veronica's friends at inflated salaries, and most damning of all, the evidence that Nathan had been secretly negotiating to sell Morrison Enterprises' proprietary technology to our biggest competitor. The last discovery had been the final straw. I could forgive many things, but not Nathan's willingness to sell out everything we'd built, everything I'd built, for a quick payday that would primarily benefit him. As I finally lay down to sleep, my mind drifted back to 3 months ago, when I'd discovered the affair in the most cliched way possible, coming home early from a technology conference to find Veronica's designer purse sitting on our kitchen counter. The confrontation had been brief. Nathan hadn't bothered to deny anything. "We've grown apart, Rebecca," he'd said, his tone almost rehearsed. "You're so focused on the technical side of things, on the perfect code, the perfect algorithm. Veronica understands the human element of business." The irony of Nathan, who could barely remember his own mother's birthday, lecturing me about understanding people would have been laughable if it hadn't been so insulting. What he'd really meant was, Veronica is younger, more impressed by me, and doesn't know enough to question my decisions. I hadn't argued. I'd simply nodded and said, "I want a divorce." The shock on his face had been the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. He'd expected tears, pleading, perhaps a promise to try harder to be the wife he wanted. Instead, I'd moved out. The next day, taking only my personal belongings and leaving him with a house full of furniture I no longer wanted. The divorce proceedings had moved quickly, with Nathan unusually amenable to my requests. In retrospect, his cooperation should have been a warning sign. He'd agreed to my terms because he'd already begun positioning Veronica within the company, making plans to edge me out completely once the divorce was finalized. What he didn't know, what I'd never corrected his assumption about, was that my 51% ownership had been carefully protected in our prenuptial agreement. Nathan had forgotten that detail over the years, operating as though the company was entirely his creation, his domain. The few times I'd mentioned my majority stake, he'd dismissed it as just a legal technicality and not how we actually run things. Tomorrow would bring clarity on exactly how things would be run moving forward. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I rose immediately, without the usual desire to hit snooze. After a quick run on the treadmill to channel my nervous energy, I showered and began preparing with the focus of a soldier arming for battle. Hair styled in a sleek professional updo. Makeup is subtle but flawless. The charcoal suit with a silk blouse in deep burgundy, power colors as Alicia would say. Simple pearl earrings that had been my mother's. No wedding ring, of course, but in its place, a signet ring bearing my family crest that had belonged to my grandmother. A small reminder of where I came from and whose strength ran in my veins. At 7:15, Caroline texted that she was outside with the car. I gathered my leather portfolio containing copies of all the relevant documents, though they had already been digitally distributed to each board member's secure email 30 minutes earlier. Timed so Nathan wouldn't see them until he was all ready. At the office. "Ready for this?" Caroline asked as I slid into the back seat beside her. I nodded, feeling calmer than I had in months. "More than ready." She smiled, her expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal vindication, on my behalf. "Then let's go take back your company." The Morrison Enterprises headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. As we rode the express elevator to the executive floor, Caroline briefed me on last-minute details. "Security has been instructed to grant you full access, as per the ownership documentation I submitted yesterday. The board members are all confirmed attending, either in person or via secure video. IT has prepared the forensic evidence presentation, and legal has the termination papers ready." She paused. "Nathan arrived 15 minutes ago. Veronica is with him." Perfect. I wanted them both present for what was about to happen. The elevator doors opened onto the familiar reception area with its minimalist design and giant illuminated company logo, a stylized M that I'd sketched on a napkin during our first year in business. Nathan had later claimed credit for the design during an interview with a tech magazine, one of many small appropriations I'd let slide over the years. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. "Ms. Morrison, we weren't expecting you today." "Hello, Diane. I'm here for the board meeting." "Of course," she stammered, clearly confused. "They're gathering in the main conference room." As we walked through the open office area, conversations hushed. Employees stared or quickly averted their eyes. Everyone had heard about the divorce, and most had witnessed Nathan parading Veronica around as his new second-in-command. I kept my head high, acknowledging those brave enough to meet my gaze with a small smile. We paused outside the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see several board members already seated, along with Nathan at the head of the table. Veronica stood behind him, leaning over his shoulder to point at something on his tablet, her hand lingering on his back in a clearly proprietary gesture. "Ready?" Caroline asked quietly. I took a deep breath and nodded. "It's time." We pushed open the doors and stepped into the room. The conversation instantly died. Nathan looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" His tone suggested I'd wandered into the wrong building entirely. "Good morning, Nathan," I said pleasantly. "I'm here for the board meeting. As majority shareholder, I believe that's my right." His face paled. Slightly, but he recovered quickly. "This is highly irregular. We're discussing sensitive company matters today." "I'm aware," I replied, moving to the empty chair directly opposite him at the other end of the table. "That's precisely why I'm here." Caroline took the seat to my right, opening her laptop with calm efficiency. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "Rebecca, whatever game you're playing." "It's no game, Nathan," I interrupted, my voice carrying clearly across the table. As the board members have just been informed via email, I've called this special session to address some critical concerns about the company's current leadership and future direction. The board members, 5 distinguished business leaders and investors who had backed us from the early days, were already examining the documents on their tablets, their expressions growing increasingly grave. Veronica hovered uncertainly behind Nathan, her perfectly manicured hand still resting on his shoulder. She wore a fitted dress in exactly the shade of blue Nathan had always said I should wear, but didn't have the coloring for. The territorial display might have hurt months ago, but now it only confirmed what I already knew. She was playing a role designed specifically to be everything I wasn't. "What is the meaning of this?" Nathan demanded, his face reddening as he scrolled through the documents. "I believe the evidence speaks for itself," I replied calmly, "but allow me to provide some context for the board." I opened my presentation, which appeared on the large screen at the center of the table. The first slide displayed a simple timeline of Morrison Enterprises, beginning with our founding 15 years ago and highlighting key milestones. As you all know, Morrison Enterprises began with a singular vision: to create adaptive security, algorithms that could protect data against emerging threats. What some of you may not know is whose vision that actually was. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the original code for our flagship product, with my name in the developer comments. I wrote the core algorithm that became Secure Adapt. I developed the architecture that still forms the foundation of our security suite. I looked directly at Nathan. I've allowed a different narrative to persist because partnership meant more to me than public recognition. Nathan's face had gone, from red to white. "This is absurd. Rebecca handled some early coding, yes, but the vision was mine," I said firmly. "And I have the documentation to prove it, including the original MIT research papers that predate our marriage." Board member Helen Winters, a sharp-eyed venture capitalist who had been our first major investor, leaned forward. "Mrs. Morrison, Ms. Chen, please," I corrected gently. "I'm reverting to my maiden name." "Ms. Chen, then," Helen amended. "Are you suggesting Mr. Morrison has misrepresented his role in the company's founding?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. But that's actually the least of my concerns." I moved to the next slide, which detailed the financial discrepancies I'd uncovered. What should concern this board more immediately is the evidence that Mr. Morrison has been systematically diverting company resources and preparing to sell proprietary technology to Axiom Systems. A collective murmur ran through the room. Axiom was our biggest competitor, and a sale to them would effectively end Morrison Enterprises as we knew it. Nathan slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrageous accusation. You're manufacturing evidence because you're bitter about our personal situation. These financial records aren't manufactured, Nathan." I clicked through several more slides showing irregular transfers, questionable expenses, and most damning of all, emails between Nathan and Axiom's CEO discussing the potential sale of our core technology. "I can explain all of this," Nathan insisted, looking around the table at the increasingly troubled board members. "Rebecca has taken everything out of context. This is nothing but a vindictive attack because I've moved on personally." Veronica shifted uncomfortably, finally removing her hand from Nathan's shoulder as the weight of the evidence became clear. "If it were just about our marriage, Nathan, we wouldn't be here," I said quietly. "This is about the company we built. The company I still own 51% of, as everyone in this room is now being reminded." That statement hung in the air. Several board members were examining the ownership documentation Caroline had provided, their expressions increasingly grim. "Furthermore," I continued, "I've uncovered evidence of inappropriate hiring practices, including the creation of several high-paying positions for individuals with connections to—" I glanced briefly at Veronica. "Certain employees despite these individuals lacking appropriate qualifications." Veronica's face flushed as several board members turned to look at her. "This company isn't your personal fiefdom, Nathan," I said, my voice strengthening. "It never was, though I allowed you to operate as if it were. That ends today." I nodded to Caroline, who stood and distributed physical copies of a final document to each board member. Before you is a motion for the immediate termination of Nathan Morrison as CEO of Morrison Enterprises on grounds of financial impropriety, breach of fiduciary duty, and attempted intellectual property theft. As majority shareholder, I have the authority to call this vote. All those in favor? The tension in the boardroom was palpable as the board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from shock to concern. Helen Winters was the first to raise her hand. I vote in favor of the motion, she said firmly. One by one, the other board members followed suit. Nathan watched in disbelief as his carefully constructed empire crumbled before his eyes. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, looking desperately around the table. "You can't just walk in here after months of absence and stage a coup." "It's not a coup, Nathan," I replied calmly. "It's corporate governance. The board has spoken." Caroline stood, handing a document to Nathan. "Your termination is effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear your personal items from your office." Veronica's face had gone pale. She took a step back from Nathan, suddenly aware that she had hitched her wagon to a falling star. "And Ms. Peterson," I added, turning to Veronica, "your position is also terminated, effective immediately." Her mouth fell open. "You can't." "I can, and I have. The documentation of your involvement in the misappropriation of company resources is quite thorough. You're fortunate we're not pursuing criminal charges." Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "This isn't over, Rebecca." "It is, actually," I replied, my voice steady. "Security is waiting outside to escort you both from the building. Your personal belongings will be sent to you after they've been examined for company property." As if on cue, 2 security officers entered the conference room. The board members watched in uncomfortable silence as Nathan and Veronica were escorted out, their expressions a mixture of shock, anger, and, in Veronica's case, the dawning realization that her carefully calculated career move had just imploded, spectacularly. Once they were gone, I turned back to the board. "I apologize for the disruption. I know this is unexpected, but I assure you it was necessary." "Ms. Chen," Helen Winters said, using my maiden name with a slight nod of acknowledgement. "While the evidence you've presented is concerning, we now have a leadership vacuum at a critical time. The Westfield contract negotiations are in their final stages and the Q3 earnings call is in 3 weeks." I smiled confidently. "I'm well aware, which is why I've prepared a transition plan." I switched to the next slide in my presentation, displaying an organizational chart with my name at the top as acting CEO. With the board's approval, I'll step in as acting CEO effective immediately. I've been quietly monitoring all aspects of the business during my supposed absence, and I'm fully prepared to lead the company through this transition. "And the Westfield negotiations?" asked James Rothman, our most recent board addition. "I've already reached out to Marcus Westfield personally. He and I have maintained a professional relationship for years. He's aware of the situation and has expressed his continued confidence in Morrison Enterprises under my leadership." The tension in the room gradually eased as I walked them through the transition plan, addressing each concern methodically and demonstrating my intimate knowledge of the company's operations, knowledge that surprised those who had bought into Nathan's narrative of me as merely the supportive wife. By the end of the meeting, the board had unanimously approved my appointment as acting CEO, with a formal review scheduled in 6 months to consider making the position permanent. As the board members filed out, Helen lingered behind. "I owe you an apology," she said once we were alone. "I should have seen through Nathan's maneuvering earlier." I shook my head. "He fooled a lot of people, including me, for longer than I care to admit." Helen smiled wryly. "Not completely, though. You kept your controlling interest. A fortunate precaution that turned out to be necessary." She nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I look forward to seeing what Morrison Enterprises becomes under your leadership. The true founder is at the helm at last." After Helen departed, Caroline and I remained in the conference room, the magnitude of what we'd just accomplished slowly sinking in. "I can't believe how smoothly that went," Caroline said, gathering her papers. "I expected more resistance from Lombard and Haskins. They've always been in Nathan's pocket." "They're businessmen first," I replied. "The evidence was too damning. Supporting Nathan would have made them complicit." We walked to what had been Nathan's office, my office now. The panoramic views of the city skyline were impressive, but the space itself felt cold and impersonal, with its minimalist furniture and conspicuous lack of personal touches. Nathan had always preferred style over comfort, image over substance. "We should get your things moved in here today," Caroline suggested, running her finger along the edge of the sleek desk. I shook my head. "Not yet. There's something I need to do first." Caroline raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I need to address the staff," I explained. "Right now they're watching Nathan and Veronica being escorted out, and rumors are probably already flying. They deserve to hear directly from me what's happening." Caroline nodded approvingly. "Want me to set it up in the main conference area?" "Please." "All staff, as soon as possible." While Caroline made the arrangements, I took a moment to center myself. Through the glass walls of the office, I could see employees gathered in small clusters, whispering among themselves, casting curious glances in my direction. Most of them knew me, at least by sight, but few had any idea of my true role in founding the company. That was about to change. 30 minutes later, I stood before the assembled staff in our largest conference area. Nearly 200 employees had squeezed in, with more joining via video conference from our satellite offices. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach. "For those who don't know me, I'm Rebecca Chen, co-founder of Morrison Enterprises. Until this morning, I was also the wife of Nathan Morrison, though our divorce will be finalized next week." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I know many of you are confused by the events you've witnessed today. Let me be clear. Nathan Morrison has been removed as CEO by unanimous decision of the board. This action was taken after the discovery of serious financial improprieties and breach of fiduciary duty." I paused, allowing the information to sink in. "I have been appointed acting CEO, effective immediately. I want to assure all of you that the company is on solid financial footing, and our projects and client relationships will continue without disruption." I saw relief in many faces, alongside uncertainty and curiosity. Some of you have been with Morrison Enterprises since the early days. You may remember that I was once a regular presence in these offices, working alongside many of you to build our core technology. Over time, I stepped back from daily operations, a decision I now regret. I took a deep breath before continuing. "Moving forward, I promise transparency, integrity, and a renewed commitment to the innovative spirit that made this company successful in the first place. I also promise that your jobs are secure. The only personnel changes being made today are at the executive level." This brought visible relief to many faces in the crowd. "I'll be meeting with department heads throughout the day to ensure a smooth transition. For now, please continue with your regular duties. My door is open if you have concerns, but I assure you that these changes will ultimately strengthen our company." As I concluded my remarks, a tentative applause began, quickly growing stronger. I was touched by the show of support, particularly from those employees who had been with us from the beginning, those who remembered my contributions before Nathan had gradually pushed me into the background. The following hours were a whirlwind of meetings and calls. I met with each department head, reassuring them about the transition and addressing their concerns. Most were professional and adaptable, though a few who had been particularly close to Nathan were noticeably cooler. By late afternoon, I finally had a moment to call Alicia. "So?" she demanded as soon as she answered. "Did you destroy him? Please, tell me you destroyed him." I laughed, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in months. "He's gone. They're both gone." "And the board?" unanimously approved my appointment as acting CEO. Alicia's squeal of delight was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I wish I could have seen his face. Was he shocked? Please tell me he was shocked. Complete disbelief, I confirmed, allowing myself a small smile of satisfaction. He really thought he'd managed to erase my contributions so thoroughly that no one would remember. Classic narcissist, Alicia scoffed. So what happens next? Now comes the hard part, proving I deserve the position beyond just owning the majority of shares. The board gave me 6 months to show results before making my appointment permanent. You'll do it, Alicia said confidently. You built that company as much as he did. More, probably. Thanks for believing in me, I said softly. I needed that. Today. After ending the call with Alicia, I addressed a few urgent emails before deciding to call it a day. The office had mostly emptied, with just a few dedicated employees still at their desks. I gathered my things, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. As I waited for the elevator, I received a text from an unknown number. You have no idea what you've done. This isn't over. Nathan, of course. I blocked the number without responding and stepped into the elevator, refusing to let him spoil this moment. Outside, the setting sun bathed the city in golden light. I decided to walk home, needing the fresh air and time to process the day's events. As I passed our favorite Italian restaurant, now just my favorite, I supposed, I impulsively decided to stop for dinner. Table for one? The hostess asked. Yes, thank you. She led me to a quiet corner table with a view of the street. I ordered a glass of wine and the mushroom risotto, then sat back, finally allowing myself to fully absorb what had happened. I had done it. After months of careful planning and evidence gathering, I had reclaimed my company and my professional identity. The satisfaction was profound, but so was the weight of responsibility. 200 employees now depended on my leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Heard the news. Congratulations, CEO. Still on for that interview Thursday? I smiled and replied, absolutely. I have quite a story to tell. As I sipped my wine, my mind turned to the challenges ahead. The company needed stability after today's upheaval. The Westfield contract needed to be secured, and the corporate culture Nathan had created, competitive, often toxic, and dismissive of work-life balance, needed an overhaul. But those were tomorrow's problems. Tonight, I would allow myself this moment of victory. The waiter arrived with my risotto, steam rising invitingly from the creamy rice. Enjoying your evening, ma'am? Very much so, I replied with genuine warmth. It's been quite a day. As I ate, I noticed a couple enter the restaurant. The man in an expensive suit, the woman significantly younger and dressed to impress. They reminded me so much of Nathan and Veronica that I had to look twice to confirm it wasn't them. It was a sobering reminder that what had happened in my marriage wasn't unique. Men in positions of power discarding their partners for younger, more admiring versions was practically a cliché. The difference in my case was the outcome. I wondered what Nathan was doing now. Packing up his things from our house, perhaps, or consulting with lawyers about fighting my takeover. Maybe he was with Veronica, assuring her that this setback was temporary, that he would find a way to regain control. Good luck with that, I thought, taking another sip of wine. The documentation Caroline and I had compiled was bulletproof. The board's vote had been unanimous. And most importantly, I owned 51% of the company, a fact that Nathan had conveniently forgotten over the years, but was now painfully aware of. My phone buzzed again, Caroline this time, just got a call from Nathan's attorney. He's demanding an emergency board meeting to contest his termination. I sighed, the momentary peace disturbed. On what grounds? Claims the evidence was obtained illegally and that you manipulated the board. Standard desperate tactics. Nothing to worry about, but wanted to give you a heads up. Thanks. Let's discuss strategy in the morning. I returned to my meal, determined not to let Nathan's desperate maneuvers spoil my evening. This was exactly what I had expected. He would fight, using every tool at his disposal. But I had prepared for this, spending months building an airtight case with Caroline's legal expertise guiding me. As I finished my dinner, the restaurant began to fill with the evening crowd. Business dinners, first dates, old friends catching up, normal life continuing all around me while my own had been turned upside down, then righted again on my own terms. On impulse, I ordered a tiramisu for dessert, something I rarely indulged. And why not? This was a day for breaking patterns. Walking home in the cool evening air, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For 15 years, my identity had been tied to Nathan's, first as his girlfriend, then wife, always the supportive partner behind his success. Even in the company we had built together, I had gradually allowed myself to be pushed into the shadows. No, more. Rebecca Chen was stepping into the light. Back at my loft, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a nightcap, a small glass of the expensive scotch Alicia had sent me when I filed for divorce. "For celebrating your independence," the note read. It seemed appropriate now. I stepped out onto my small balcony, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nathan was plotting his next move. I had no illusions that he would accept defeat gracefully. He would fight, and it might get ugly. Let him try, I thought, sipping the smoky scotch. I was done being underestimated. My phone chimed with an email alert. I almost ignored it. Enough business for one day, but the sender's name caught my attention. Marcus Westfield. Dear Rebecca, I was pleased to hear of your return to Morrison Enterprises leadership. While I've always respected Nathan's business acumen, I've long suspected you were the true innovative force behind your security solutions. I'd die. Like to meet with you personally to discuss the contract our teams have been negotiating. I believe we can find terms that better reflect our mutual goals now that you're at the helm. Would tomorrow at 2 p.m. at my office work for you? Best regards, Marcus. I smiled, typing a quick acceptance. This was unexpected, but welcome news. The Westfield contract would secure our financial position for the next 3 years and open doors to government contracts we had previously been unable to access. Tomorrow would be another challenging day, but I was ready for it. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged, in charge of my own destiny and the company I had helped build. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the journey ahead. Rebuilding Morrison Enterprises would take time. Establishing my leadership would require proving myself daily. But I had something now that I had lost somewhere along the way during my marriage to Nathan: confidence in my own abilities. The best revenge wasn't just taking back what was rightfully mine, it was thriving afterwards. And that's exactly what I intended to do. My alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m. the next morning. Unlike my usual routine of hitting snooze multiple times, I was instantly awake, my mind already racing with the tasks ahead. The initial victory had been secured, but I knew Nathan well enough to expect retaliation. He wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. He never had. After a quick shower and a strong cup of coffee, I dressed with deliberate care. A navy power suit with subtle gold accessories, including my grandmother's vintage watch. She had built her own accounting firm in the 1960s when female entrepreneurs were rare. Never let them see you sweat, she'd advised me when I started my career. And never dress for the job you have. Dress for the job you're taking. The early morning streets were quiet as my car service drove me to the office. I wanted to arrive before most employees to settle into my new role without an audience. The security guard at the front desk did a double take when I walked in. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," he said, quickly recovering. "Congratulations on your new position." Word traveled fast. "Thank you, George. I'll be expecting Marcus Westfield at 2 p.m. Please make sure he's escorted directly to my office when he arrives. Of course, ma'am. The executive floor was deserted. At 6:30 a.m. I paused outside what was now my office, running my fingers over the nameplate that still read, Nathan Morrison, CEO. That would need to change immediately. Inside, the office felt different in the early morning light, less imposing, more of a blank canvas. I set down my briefcase and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city was waking up below, the first rays of sunlight glinting off neighboring skyscrapers. This view had been Nathan's alone for too long. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Court filing from Nathan just hit our legal team's desk. Seeking emergency injunction to block. Leadership change. Meeting with legal at 8 a.m. to discuss response. I had expected this. See you at 8. I spent the next hour familiarizing myself with Nathan's filing system and examining the contents of his desk drawers, mostly empty now, aside from company supplies. Security had been thorough in supervising his exit. In the credenza, behind the desk, I found a half-empty bottle of scotch and 2 crystal glasses. Nathan's preferred method of closing deals had always involved alcohol, another aspect of the company culture I intended to change. By 7:30, employees began filtering. Passed through the glass walls. I caught curious glances directed my way. I kept my focus on reviewing the latest Westfield contract draft, making notes where I saw room for improvement. At precisely 8 a.m., Caroline arrived with Rajiv Mehta, our lead corporate counsel. "Morning," Caroline said, looking remarkably put together, despite the early hour. "Sleep well?" "Better than expected," I admitted. "What are we dealing with?" Rajiv opened his laptop. "Nathan's filing is aggressive but predictable. He's claiming the board's decision was based on fraudulent evidence and that his termination violates several clauses in his employment contract." "Does it?" I asked. "Not at all. His contract explicitly allows for termination by board vote in cases of financial impropriety. We have him dead to rights on that." I nodded. "What's our response?" "We've already filed a counter-motion with evidence of his financial misdeeds. The judge assigned to the case is Judge Reynolds." I felt a flicker of relief. Judge Reynolds was known for her no-nonsense approach and lack of patience with corporate maneuvering. "She's set an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning," Rajiv continued. "Nathan's team will argue for immediate reinstatement pending a full hearing." "And our strategy?" "Present the clearest financial evidence, the offshore account transfers, and the unauthorized negotiations with Axiom. Even without a full hearing, that should be enough to maintain the status quo until a more thorough review." I nodded. "I want to be there." Caroline frowned. "Are you sure? It could get ugly." "All the more reason. I won't hide from Nathan or let him think he's intimidated me." Our meeting was interrupted by my assistant, formerly Nathan's assistant before Veronica, knocking on the door. "Ms. Chen, I've arranged for your personal items to be brought up from storage, and the IT department needs to know what credentials and access levels to assign to you." "Full administrative access to all systems," I replied. "And please contact facilities about changing the nameplate on this door." "Yes, ma'am. Also, there's Ms. Peterson in reception insisting on speaking with you." I exchanged glances with Caroline. "Veronica here already? That was unexpected." "Have security escort her to the small conference room. I'll speak with her briefly." After my assistant left, Caroline raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's wise? She could be recording the conversation for Nathan's legal team." "Let her," I said, gathering my notes. "I have nothing to hide." Veronica sat stiffly in the conference room, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap. She'd made an effort to look professional in a conservative dress, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. The confidence she'd displayed yesterday, standing behind Nathan as if she already occupied the throne, had evaporated. "Ms. Peterson," I said, closing the door behind me. "This is unexpected." "I need my job back," she said without preamble, her voice tight. "I have rent due next week, and no savings. I sat down across from her. That's unfortunate. But given your active participation in Nathan's misappropriation of company funds, reinstatement isn't possible. Her composure cracked slightly. I didn't know what he was doing. I just did what he asked me to do. The evidence suggests otherwise. There are emails from your account coordinating the hiring of your sorority sister as our Director of Creative Innovation, a position that didn't exist until you created it. She was paid $175,000 a year, and, by all accounts, produced exactly nothing of value. Veronica's face flushed. Nathan approved all those hires. Of course he did. That doesn't make them legitimate. She leaned forward, desperation evident in her eyes. Look, I made a mistake getting involved with Nathan. I see that now. But I need this job. You should have considered that before you helped him embezzle from the company and pushed me out of my own firm. I kept my voice level. Your termination stands, Ms. Peterson, though I would be willing to forego pressing charges for your role in the financial improprieties in exchange for your cooperation. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of cooperation? Information. Nathan is challenging his termination in court. Anything you can provide about his plans or activities that we should know about would be valuable. Veronica hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. He's been contacting key clients since yesterday, telling them the company is in disarray and suggesting they delay any pending contracts until the leadership situation is resolved. She pulled up a series of texts. He specifically mentioned calling Marcus Westfield last night. This was valuable intelligence. I had suspected Nathan might try to sabotage client relationships, but confirmation helped me prepare. What else? Veronica hesitated. He's meeting with Axiom's CEO today at noon. He said he has something they want, regardless of whether he's at Morrison Enterprises. My blood ran cold. Our proprietary algorithms. Nathan wouldn't have been able to take the actual code. Our security was too good for that, but he had enough knowledge to recreate the basic architecture. Thank you for this information, I said, making notes. Is there anything else? Veronica bit her lip. He's not well. After we left yesterday, he drank an entire bottle of whiskey and started talking about how he'd burn it all down before letting you win. While I had little sympathy for Veronica, this glimpse of Nathan's state of mind was concerning. Nathan had always been controlled, calculating. If he was coming unhinged, his actions might become more unpredictable. I'll have HR prepare a severance package, I said, standing up. 2 months' salary in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and your continued cooperation should we need additional information. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. As she stood to leave, curiosity got the better of me. Why did you do it? You had a promising career ahead of you here. Why risk it all for an affair with your married boss? Veronica's expression hardened slightly. He made me feel special, important, like I was the only one who truly understood his vision. She gave a bitter laugh. Classic, right? The secretary falling for the powerful boss's attention. And now? Now I see he was using me, just like he used everyone. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, I am sorry about how things happened. I never thought about how it would affect you. That much was obvious, I replied coolly. After Veronica left, I immediately called Rajiv to brief him on Nathan's meeting with Axiom. We needed to send them a cease and desist letter immediately, warning that any technology developed with Nathan that resembled our proprietary systems would result in immediate legal action. My next call was to Marcus Westfield, rescheduling our meeting to 11 a.m. instead of 2 p.m., before Nathan's lunchtime meeting with Axiom could potentially derail our negotiations. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. I met with FAI, the executive team, now missing its CEO and executive assistant to the CEO, to outline my immediate priorities and expectations. Some seemed relieved by the change in leadership, while others were clearly reserving judgment. The Westfield. Contract is our top priority, I told them. Following that, we need to stabilize client relationships and prepare for the quarterly earnings call. Nathan may be attempting to undermine confidence in our leadership transition, so I want daily reports on any unusual client concerns. By 10:45, I was reviewing my notes for the Westfield meeting when my assistant buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Westfield has arrived, Ms. Chen. Please show him in." Marcus Westfield was an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone who had built a technology empire from nothing. His company, Westfield Technologies, was a major player in hardware manufacturing, and our security solutions were perfect for their expanding smart device line. "Rebecca," he said warmly, taking my offered hand. "It's been too long." "Indeed it has, Marcus. Thank you for accommodating the schedule change." He waved it off. "Nathan called me last night, quite agitated. Said there had been a hostile takeover, and that I should delay signing anything until he sorted things out." I smiled thinly. "Did he mention that the hostile takeover was led by the majority shareholder and company co-founder?" "He conveniently omitted that detail." Marcus took a seat across from me. "I've always wondered why you stayed in the background all these years. Your technical insights during the early development meetings were always more substantive than Nathan's." "A question I've been asking myself lately," I admitted. "But that's in the past. Today, I'm interested in discussing modifications to the contract that I believe will benefit both our companies." Over the next hour, we negotiated terms that were indeed more favorable to both sides. Nathan had been pushing for exclusive rights to Westfield's hardware integration, which would have been highly profitable in the short term, but limited our ability to grow in other markets. I proposed a non-exclusive arrangement with preferred partner status, which would allow both companies more flexibility. "I like this approach," Marcus said, reviewing the modified terms. Nathan was always focused on the immediate win. "You're playing the long game." "Exactly. And speaking of the long game, I understand Nathan is meeting with Axiom today." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're well informed. I make it my business to be. I want to assure you that any conversations he has with them about our technology would constitute intellectual property theft. We've already sent cease and desist notices." "I never doubted it," Marcus said. "Nathan mentioned he had valuable insights to share with them. I assumed he was scrambling for a soft landing." By the end of our meeting, we had a handshake agreement on the revised contract terms, with the final paperwork to be signed by the end of the week, a significant win for my first full day as CEO. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused. "You know, Rebecca, I always thought Nathan was the driving force behind Morrison Enterprises. I'm beginning to see I had it backward." "A common misconception," I replied with a smile. "One I'm in the process of correcting." After Marcus left, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from Caroline and a text. Judge Reynolds agreed to hear arguments first thing tomorrow. Be at the courthouse by 8 a.m. Also, Nathan was spotted in the building lobby. Security didn't let him up. Nathan was getting desperate. Good. Desperate people made mistakes, and I needed every advantage for tomorrow's hearing. I spent the afternoon preparing with our legal team, reviewing the evidence against Nathan and practicing my responses to likely questions from the judge. By 6 p.m., I was confident in our position, but mentally exhausted. As I packed up to leave, my assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Chen, there's a delivery for you." She placed a small box on my desk. No card, no return address. "Who brought this?" I asked, suddenly wary. "Courier service. It passed security screening." I carefully opened the box to find a single chess piece inside, a white queen, broken in half. The message was clear. Nathan was declaring war. I stared at the broken chess piece, a chill running down my spine. Nathan had always been fond of chess metaphors in business, constantly talking about being several moves ahead of competitors. During happier times, we had played matches on Sunday mornings over coffee. He'd been a sore loser then, too. Ms. Chen, is everything all right? My assistant hovered uncertainly in the doorway. Fine, I replied, closing the box. Please have security review the footage of the courier's delivery. I want to know who sent this. After she left, I took a photo of the broken queen and sent it to Caroline with a brief message. Nathan's latest move. See you at court tomorrow. Her response was immediate. Intimidation tactics. He's desperate. I hoped she was right, but the gesture unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Nathan knew how to get under my skin. 15 years of marriage had given him plenty of practice. The drive home through evening traffic gave me time to collect my thoughts. Despite the chess piece, today had been largely successful. The Westfield contract was nearly secured. The initial shock of leadership change was settling among the staff. And thanks to Veronica's unexpected cooperation, I had valuable intelligence about Nathan's plans. As my car pulled up to my building, I spotted a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. Michael Chen, the journalist. He was casually dressed, in jeans and a leather jacket, looking very different from his professional attire at the restaurant. Ambushing me at home? I asked as I approached. That's not your usual style. He smiled apologetically. Not an ambush, I promise. I was in the neighborhood and took a chance you might be home. I raised an eyebrow. At 7 in the evening on a workday? Unlikely. Fair point, he conceded. Truth is, I heard about Nathan's court filing and wanted to check if our interview was still on for tomorrow. I considered this. Michael was being opportunistic, but he'd always been fair in his reporting. Having the Wall Street Journal cover, my side of the story could be valuable, especially if Nathan was reaching out to other business reporters. The interview stands, but I can only give you 30 minutes. Court hearing in the morning, and I need to prepare. Relief flickered across his face. Thank you. Can I buy you dinner? You probably haven't eaten. I hadn't, in fact. Lunch had been a salad eaten hurriedly between meetings. There's a Thai place around the corner, I suggested. Good food, quiet, enough to talk. As we walked, Michael kept the conversation light, asking about the neighborhood and how I was settling in. It was a welcome distraction from broken chess queens and court hearings. The restaurant was small and unassuming, with only a few other diners present. The owner, Mrs. Shriprafai, greeted me by name. Ms. Rebecca, usual table? Please, Mrs. S. And the usual order as well. Michael looked impressed as we were shown to a corner table. You've made yourself at home quickly. Food is my weakness, I admitted. Finding the best local spots was my first priority after moving. After ordering, Michael set his phone on the table. Do you mind if I record our conversation? Off the record for now, just to get my facts straight for tomorrow. I nodded, taking a sip of water. Go ahead. Let's start with the basics. How long had you been planning yesterday's boardroom revelation? That's hardly starting with the basics, I laughed. But if you're asking whether this was a spontaneous reaction to Nathan's affair or a calculated business decision, it was the latter. I've been documenting Nathan's financial improprieties for months. Before or after you discovered the affair? After. The affair was the catalyst that made me look more closely at the company finances. What I found was much worse than I expected. Michael leaned forward. And what exactly did you find? I chose my words carefully. Significant financial irregularities that constituted breach of fiduciary duty. Unauthorized transfers to offshore accounts, nepotistic hiring practices, and most seriously, preliminary negotiations to sell proprietary technology to competitors. Axiom Systems? I paused, surprised by his knowledge. You've done your homework, he shrugged. It's my job. Industry rumors suggested Nathan had been meeting with their CEO, but selling your core technology would effectively end Morrison Enterprises as a competitive entity. Why would he do that? Money, I said simply. Nathan's personal finances aren't as robust as his public image suggests. He's made some poor investment decisions over the years. The money he was siphoning from the company wasn't enough to maintain his lifestyle. Our food arrived. Pad Thai for me, green curry for Michael. We paused as Mrs. Shriprify personally set down the dishes with a warm smile. Special chili sauce for you, she said, placing a small dish beside my plate. Made fresh today. After she left, Michael continued. So yesterday's boardroom coup. Not a coup, I interrupted. A legitimate exercise of shareholder authority. Fair enough. Yesterday's corporate governance action. Had the board members seen the evidence before the meeting? No, I presented it at the meeting itself. I wanted their immediate, unfiltered reaction. A risky strategy, Michael observed, but effective. They couldn't coordinate responses or prepare counterarguments. Their shock was genuine. Michael nodded thoughtfully. And now Nathan is challenging the board's decision in court? Attempting to, I confirmed. The hearing is tomorrow morning. His lawyers are arguing that his termination violated his employment agreement. They're seeking an emergency injunction to reinstate him pending a full hearing. Do they have a case? Our lawyers don't think so. The evidence of financial misconduct is clear, and his contract explicitly allows termination for such behavior. Michael made a note on his phone. How are clients responding to the leadership change? Positively, so far. I spent today reassuring our major clients and partners. The Westfield contract is proceeding as planned. That's a significant win, Michael said, looking genuinely impressed. That contract has been in negotiation for months. I allowed myself a small smile. Marcus Westfield and I have a long professional relationship. He understands the situation. As we ate, Michael skillfully navigated from business questions to more personal territory. Did you ever suspect Nathan might be capable of this level? Of deception? 15 years is a long time to be married to someone. The question hit harder than I expected. Had I suspected? There had been small warning signs over the years. Nathan's increasing secrecy about company finances, his defensive reactions whenever I questioned business decisions, but I had attributed these changes to normal marital friction, not systematic betrayal. I knew Nathan was ambitious, I said carefully. I knew he could be ruthless in business, but I believed we were partners in both life and work. Learning, otherwise, was difficult. Michael's expression softened. I can imagine. Can you? I asked, more sharply than intended. Have you ever had your spouse betray you professionally and personally, simultaneously? No, he admitted. But I've reported on enough corporate divorces to recognize the pattern. The spouse who builds a company with their partner, only to be gradually sidelined and eventually discarded. It happens more often than people realize. Usually to women, I observed. Usually, he agreed. What makes your story different is that you fought back, and won. The battle, not the war, I cautioned. Nathan isn't finished. The broken chess piece? I looked up, startled. How did you know about that? Michael had the grace to look embarrassed. A source in your building mentioned seeing a courier delivery. I put two and two together based on Nathan's known chess obsession. Are you surveilling me, Michael? I asked, suddenly wary. Not personally, he assured me. But when a major tech CEO is ousted by his wife in a boardroom showdown, people talk. I have sources watching both you and Nathan. And what are your sources saying about Nathan? Michael hesitated. That he's not taking this well. He was spotted at Axiom's offices today, and later drinking heavily at the Oak Room. There are rumors. He's liquidating personal assets. This was concerning. Nathan liquidating assets suggested he was either planning something expensive or preparing to disappear. You should include that in your article, I said. The business community should know who they're dealing with. I intend to, Michael assured me. This story has everything. Corporate intrigue, personal betrayal, revenge. It's going to make waves. Just make sure the facts are accurate, I said, signaling for the check. I have a company to run, and I need the business world to see me as a capable CEO, not just a scorned wife. That's exactly what makes this compelling, Michael said. You're not playing the victim, you're taking control. As we left the restaurant, the night air had turned chilly. Michael offered his jacket, but I declined. I'll see you tomorrow after. Court? I said, extending my hand professionally. He shook it with a wry smile. Good luck in the morning. Though from what I've seen, you make your own luck. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured a small glass of wine. Tomorrow would be another battle, and I needed to be sharp. The interview with Michael had been unexpectedly therapeutic. Articulating my position had helped clarify my thoughts. I was reviewing my notes for the court hearing when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I would let it go to voicemail, but given the circumstances, I answered. Rebecca Chen speaking. Silence, then heavy breathing. Hello? I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone. You think you've won? Nathan's voice, slightly slurred. You haven't. I should have hung up, but curiosity kept me on the line. Nathan, it's nearly 10 p.m. If you have something to say it through your lawyers. They don't understand what's at stake, he said, his words running together slightly. You took my company, my reputation. You took those from yourself when you decided to embezzle from the company and sleep with your secretary, I replied. Coldly. Veronica, he snapped. Her name is Veronica, and she at least appreciated my vision, unlike you. Your vision? The algorithms that built Morrison Enterprises were mine, Nathan. The core technology that made us successful came from my research. Research I funded, he shouted. With my family's money. You'd still be writing code in some basement if it weren't for me. His revisionist history was infuriating, but not surprising. Nathan had always been skilled at reshaping the past to center himself. Is there a point to this call, Nathan? Because if you're just calling to rehash history, I have court preparations to make. The point, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, is that you've forgotten who you're dealing with. I made you, Rebecca, and I can break you just as easily. You already tried that, I reminded him. It didn't work out well for you. Tomorrow is just the beginning, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. You think you know what I'm capable of? You have no idea. The threat hung in the air between us. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old fear, the gradual erosion of confidence I'd experienced during our marriage as Nathan had systematically undermined me professionally and personally. But I wasn't that person anymore. Goodbye, Nathan, I said firmly. And a word of advice. Sober up before court tomorrow. Judge Reynolds doesn't look kindly on litigants who waste her time. I hung up before he could respond, then immediately called Caroline. Nathan just called me, I said when she answered, drunk and threatening. Did you record it? She asked. Immediately all business. No, I didn't think so. Start recording all calls from unknown numbers, she advised. Threats could strengthen our case if he contests the divorce settlement. After speaking with Caroline, I tried to return to my court preparations, but Nathan's call had left me unsettled. I walked to the windows of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nathan was plotting his next move. The broken chess queen wasn't just symbolic, it was a promise. My phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. Just landed. At JFK. Coming straight to your place. Don't argue. I smiled despite myself. My sister, flying in from London without warning. Typical. An hour later, Alicia arrived in a whirlwind of designer luggage and jet lag. You look awful, she announced, giving me a critical once-over as she swept into my apartment. When did you last sleep properly? Hello to you too, I replied, embracing her. What are you doing here? I thought you had that gallery opening this weekend. Postponed, she said dismissively. This is more important. My sister is taking down her snake of an ex-husband, and I want front row seats. Despite my protest that she was overreacting, I was grateful for her presence. Alicia had always been my fiercest defender, from playground bullies to now. She ordered us food from a late-night delivery service and insisted on reviewing my outfit choices for court. No, absolutely not, she said, vetoing the conservative gray suit I'd laid out. Too bland. You need something that says, I'm taking my company back. Not, I'm apologizing for existing. She rummaged through my closet, emerging with a deep burgundy suit I rarely wore. This, with the cream silk blouse and your grandmother's pearls. Powerful, but still appropriate for court. As we sat eating takeout at my kitchen counter, Alicia filled me in on her life in London, her latest art exhibition, a new relationship with a British architect, plans to expand her gallery to Berlin. Her vibrant energy was exactly what I needed after the tension of the past few days. So, she said, pouring us both more wine, tell me truthfully, how are you really doing with all this? I considered deflecting with my usual, I'm fine, but this was Alicia. She'd see through it immediately. Angry, I admitted, and hurt, but mostly angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. For letting Nathan gradually push me into the background of my own company. For believing him when he said my stepping back was for the good of the business. Alicia nodded sympathetically. Classic gaslighting. He made you doubt your own value. And I let him, I said bitterly. That's the part I'm struggling with. I have a double master's from MIT. I wrote the algorithms that built our company. How did I allow myself to be sidelined? Because you loved him, Alicia said simply. Love makes us accept things we shouldn't. Her words struck home. I had loved Nathan, deeply and genuinely. That love had made me willing to compromise, to accommodate his need for the spotlight, to rationalize his increasingly controlling behavior as simply his leadership style. Well, love has left the building, I said firmly. Now it's just business. Alicia grinned. That's my sister talking. Now tell me about this court hearing tomorrow. Are we going to destroy him completely or just mostly? Despite my exhaustion, I found myself laughing. It's just a preliminary hearing. Don't get your hopes up for total destruction quite yet. Pity, she sighed dramatically. I wore my best demolition outfit and everything. We stayed up later than we should have, talking about everything and nothing. Having Alicia there was like a tether to my real self, the person I had been before Nathan, and the person I was becoming after him. When I finally went to bed, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, without dreams of broken chess pieces or threatening phone calls. Whatever tomorrow brought, I wouldn't face it alone. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, fitting weather for a courtroom showdown. Alicia and I shared a quiet breakfast before my car arrived to take me to the courthouse. She insisted on coming along for moral support, despite my warnings that it might be boring. Please, she scoffed. A legal battle between my sister and her cheating ex over control of a multi-million-dollar company? It's better than Netflix. The courthouse steps were more crowded than I'd expected. News of the leadership battle at Morrison Enterprises had apparently spread through the business community, and several reporters were stationed outside, including a camera crew from a financial news network. Ms. Chen, any comment on Nathan Morrison's lawsuit? Called one reporter as we approached. Ms. Chen, is it true you orchestrated a boardroom coup? I kept my expression neutral and moved past them without comment. Caroline was waiting just inside. The entrance. Immaculately dressed and radiating calm confidence. Good morning, she said, kissing my cheek. Ready for this? As I'll ever be. Alicia. Caroline acknowledged my sister with a nod. Didn't expect to see you here. Wild horses, etc., Alicia replied cheerfully. Where's the soon-to-be ex-brother-in-law? I want to see his face when he loses. Not here yet, Caroline said, checking her watch. Court convenes in 15 minutes. let's go over our strategy one more time. We found a quiet corner to confer. Rajiv joined us, bringing updated financial reports that had come in overnight, further documenting Nathan's misuse of company resources. This is solid, Caroline said, reviewing the new information. If Nathan's team tries to claim the financial irregularities were minor or authorized, we have documented proof otherwise. As we talked, the courthouse grew more crowded. I spotted Nathan's attorney, Richard Price, entering with his team. Richard had been a year ahead of Nathan and me at business school. Brilliant, arrogant, and utterly ruthless in the courtroom. He'd never liked me, perhaps because I'd consistently outscored him in our few shared classes. Price is here, I murmured. To Caroline. But no Nathan yet. Caroline frowned, checking her watch again. That's odd. Nathan's fanatically punctual, especially for important meetings. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was. Enjoying your moment in the spotlight? It won't last. I showed it to Caroline, who made a note of the time and content. More evidence of harassment if we need it. Just as the bailiff announced that Judge Reynolds was ready to begin proceedings, Nathan finally arrived. He looked terrible, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, his normally impeccable suit slightly rumpled. He didn't acknowledge me as he slid into a seat beside Richard, who looked distinctly displeased with his client's appearance. As we rose for the judge's entrance, Alicia squeezed my hand. "You've got this," she whispered. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for efficiency, surveyed the courtroom. "I understand we're here on an emergency motion for injunctive relief in the matter of Morrison versus Morrison Enterprises," she began. "Mr. Price, as the moving party, you may proceed." Richard stepped forward, every inch the polished litigator. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are seeking immediate reinstatement of Mr. Morrison as CEO pending a full hearing on the merits of his termination. The board's action was precipitous, based on incomplete information and in violation of Mr. Morrison's employment agreement." Judge Reynolds looked skeptical. "And the alleged financial improprieties documented in the respondent's filing? Are you suggesting those are fabricated?" Richard didn't miss a beat. "Not fabricated, Your Honor, but taken out of context and exaggerated. Mr. Morrison, as CEO, had broad discretion in allocating company resources. What Ms. Chen characterizes as misappropriation was simply strategic investment in developing new business relationships. Relationships with his girlfriend's sorority sisters? Caroline murmured under her breath. Judge Reynolds turned to our table. "Ms. Parker, your response?" Caroline rose. "Your Honor, the evidence of financial misconduct is clear and compelling. Mr. Morrison diverted company funds for personal use, created unnecessary positions for friends of his romantic partner, and most seriously, engaged in unauthorized negotiations to sell proprietary technology to a competitor, Axiom Systems. That's a lie." Nathan burst out, half rising from his seat before Richard yanked him back down. Judge Reynolds fixed Nathan with a chilly stare. "Mr. Morrison, outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom. Speak through your attorney or not at all." Richard quickly attempted damage control. "My apologies, Your Honor. My client is understandably emotional about these false accusations." The judge looked unimpressed. "Continue, Ms. Parker." Caroline methodically presented our evidence. Financial records, email correspondence, witness statements from key employees. As each piece was introduced, I watched Nathan's face grow increasingly flushed with anger. When Caroline mentioned Veronica's cooperation and the information she had provided, Nathan turned to glare at me with naked hatred. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. After both sides had presented their arguments, Judge Reynolds studied the documents before her. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional rustle of papers and the steady ticking of the wall clock. Finally, she looked up. Based on the evidence presented, I am denying the plaintiff's motion for emergency injunctive relief. The board's action appears to have been within its authority given the evidence of financial impropriety. Mr. Morrison's employment agreement clearly permits termination under these circumstances. Richard began to object, but the judge held up her hand. However, she continued, I am setting an expedited schedule for discovery and a full hearing on the merits. This matter deserves thorough examination. Both parties will submit complete financial records and witness lists within 10 business days. It wasn't the complete victory we'd hoped for, but it was enough for now. Nathan would remain removed as CEO while the case proceeded. As the judge rose to leave, Nathan leaned over to whisper something to Richard, who frowned and shook his head. Their disagreement was evident even from across the courtroom. Caroline began gathering our materials. Good result, she said quietly. We maintain the status quo while building our case for the full hearing. Alicia was less restrained. We won! Champagne time! Not yet, I cautioned, watching as Nathan stormed out of the courtroom without looking back. This was just the first skirmish. As we prepared to leave, Richard approached our table. My client would like to discuss settlement. Terms, he said stiffly. Caroline raised an eyebrow. We're listening. Not here, Richard replied. Formal meeting. Tomorrow at my office, 2 p.m. After he left, Alicia looked at me questioningly. Are you going to settle? I considered the question. A settlement would end the legal battle quickly, but at what cost? What terms would Nathan demand in exchange for dropping his lawsuit? We'll hear them out, I said finally. But I won't compromise on control of the company. That's non-negotiable. As we exited the courthouse, the reporters were still waiting. This time, I decided to make a brief statement. Morrison Enterprises continues to operate normally under my leadership as acting CEO. The court has denied Mr. Morrison's request for reinstatement, and we look forward to resolving this matter and focusing on our clients and innovative technology. Back in the car, Alicia looked at me with pride. CEO mode suits you. You know that, right? I smiled, feeling some of the tension of the morning draining away. It does, doesn't it? My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus Westfield. Rebecca, I just heard about the court decision. Congratulations. I'd like to finalize our contract today if possible. Absolutely, I replied. I can get the paperwork to you within the hour. As I ended the call, I noticed Caroline frowning at her phone. What is it? Nathan's already making his next move, she said, showing me her screen. It was an email notification from the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, requesting information about Morrison Enterprises' financial practices. Nathan was escalating, trying to trigger a regulatory investigation. But if he thought that would frighten me into retreat, he had seriously miscalculated. Forward that to Rajiv, I told Caroline. We have nothing to hide. In fact, a thorough investigation will only further expose Nathan's misdeeds. Alicia looked between us. So no champagne yet? I laughed, suddenly feeling lighter despite the new challenge. Maybe just one glass. We've earned it. The war was far from over, but today's victory was worth celebrating. Nathan had underestimated me once. He wouldn't make that mistake again, and neither would I. The settlement meeting at Richard Price's office was scheduled for 2 p.m., but I arrived early, a tactic Nathan himself had taught me years ago. Always arrive before your opponent, he'd said. It gives you psychological advantage and time to assess the battlefield. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the impeccably decorated reception area of Price Goldstein & Associates, watching the staff's surprised reactions to my presence. I was dressed strategically in a crimson suit that Alicia had insisted projected perfect confidence. Power dressing, she called it. Caroline arrived precisely at 1:45, immaculately prepared as always, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Any word from the SEC? I asked quietly as we waited. Our compliance team has prepared all the requested documentation, she replied. Rajiv believes the inquiry will actually work in our favor once they see Nathan's fingerprints all over the questionable transactions. At exactly 2 p.m., Richard's assistant led us to a large conference room where Richard was already seated, reviewing documents. Notably absent was Nathan himself. "Is your client joining us?" Caroline asked as we took our seats. Richard glanced at his watch. "He's been delayed. We can begin without him." That was unusual. Nathan prided himself on punctuality, especially for important meetings. His absence suggested either a deliberate power play or something more concerning. "Very well," Caroline said, opening her portfolio. "You indicated your client wishes to discuss settlement terms. We're listening." Richard slid a document across the table. "Mr. Morrison is prepared to drop all legal challenges to his termination in exchange for certain considerations." I skimmed the document, my eyes widening at the audacity of Nathan's demands. A $15 million, severance package, retention of his company shares, a seat on the board, and, most egregiously, continued ownership of all patents he had filed while at the company. "This isn't a settlement offer," I said, pushing the document back. "It's a ransom note." Richard's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Morrison built Morrison Enterprises from the ground up. He deserves to maintain connection to his life's work." "His life's work?" I repeated incredulously. "The core technology was developed from my MIT research. The initial algorithms that launched our flagship product were mine." "A collaborative effort, as I understand it," Richard countered smoothly. "This offer is unacceptable," Caroline intervened before I could respond more heatedly. "My client won't concede ownership of patents that rightfully belong to the company, nor will she agree to a $15 million payout given the evidence of Mr. Morrison's financial misconduct." I noticed something odd about Richard's demeanor. Despite his outward confidence, there was tension around his eyes, a slight stiffness in his posture. He was going through the motions, not fully committed to Nathan's position. "Our counteroffer," Caroline continued, sliding across her own document, "is a clean separation. Mr. Morrison keeps his personal investments and assets. He relinquishes all claims to company leadership, intellectual property, and board participation. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges for the financial improprieties." Richard's eyebrow raised slightly. "Criminal charges would be difficult to prove." "Perhaps," Caroline acknowledged. "But the resulting investigation would be extremely public and damaging to Mr. Morrison's reputation, regardless of outcome." At that moment, the conference room door flew open and Nathan stormed in. His appearance was shocking. Unshaven, his normally immaculate hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Nathan," Richard said, rising quickly. "We were just discussing—" "I heard what you were discussing," Nathan snapped, dropping into a chair across from me. "Criminal charges? Really, Rebecca? After everything we built together?" His voice had a dangerous edge that I recognized from our worst arguments, a tone that emerged when he felt cornered. "We're trying to find a reasonable resolution," I said, carefully. "One that acknowledges reality." Nathan laughed bitterly. "Reality? The reality is that you're trying to erase me from the company I created." "The company we created," I corrected. "A company you were willing to gut by selling our core technology to Axiom." His face flushed. "That was a strategic negotiation to understand our market position. I never intended to actually sell." "The emails suggest otherwise," Caroline interjected. "As did your meeting with their CEO yesterday." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Are you following me?" "The tech community is small, Nathan. People talk." I leaned forward, studying him. "What were you thinking? That you could sell our proprietary algorithms, walk away with millions, and leave the company hollowed out?" For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face before hardening into defiance. You don't understand business at the level I operate. Sometimes you have to appear willing to make a deal to extract valuable concessions. Save it for someone who hasn't seen your offshore account transfers, I replied. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short break to— No, Nathan interrupted. I want to hear what else my wife thinks she knows about my business dealings. Ex-wife, soon enough, I reminded him. And I know enough to ensure you never work in this industry again if you continue this fight. Nathan stared at me, a dangerous stillness settling over him. When he spoke again, his voice was unsettlingly calm. You know, Rebecca, I always admired your intelligence. It's what attracted me to you at MIT, that brilliant mind. I just never thought you'd use it against me. And I never thought you'd betray our company and our marriage simultaneously. Yet here we are. He leaned forward. One last chance. Accept my settlement offer. Let me keep my dignity and my place in the company's history. Otherwise— Otherwise what? I asked, refusing to be intimidated. A cold smile spread across his face. Otherwise, I'll have to show exactly how ruthless I can be. You've seen me compete in business, Rebecca. You've never seen me fight for survival. Caroline placed a warning hand on my arm, but I shook it off. Is that a threat, Nathan? It's a promise. This company is my legacy. I won't let you take that from me. Richard finally intervened. I think we should adjourn for today. Clearly, emotions are running high. For once, we agree, Caroline said, gathering her papers. We'll consider your offer and respond formally by the end of the week. As we stood to leave, Nathan remained seated, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between rage and calculation. Rebecca, he called as I reached the door. Did you check your email this morning? The question caught me off guard. Why? His smile widened slightly. No reason. You might want to, though, particularly your personal account. The cryptic comment left me unsettled as Caroline and I rode the elevator down to the lobby. What was that about? She asked. I don't know, I admitted, already pulling out my phone. But I don't like it. My personal email showed several new messages, but one immediately caught my attention. From TechWire, one of the industry's most influential news sites. The subject line made my blood run cold. Request for comment. Morrison Enterprises Security. Breach? I opened it quickly. Ms. Chen, we've received information suggesting Morrison Enterprises experienced a significant security breach approximately 6 months ago that potentially compromised client data. Our source claims this breach was deliberately concealed from clients and shareholders, potentially violating SEC disclosure requirements. We're preparing to run this story tomorrow and would appreciate your comment as the company's current CEO. Regards, Dana Lawson, Senior Technology Correspondent, TechWire. Caroline, I said, my voice tight as I handed her my phone. We have a problem. She read the email, her expression growing grave. A planted story. Nathan's trying to create a crisis of confidence among your clients and investors. But is it true? Was there a breach? We need to get back to the office immediately, Caroline said, already dialing, and get your cybersecurity team on this now. As our car navigated through midday traffic, I tried to remember any mention of a security incident during the past year. Nothing major had crossed my desk, but I had been gradually excluded from day-to-day operations as Nathan maneuvered Veronica into a more prominent role. My phone rang. Rajiv, our legal counsel. I just got a call from TechWire asking about a security breach, he said without preamble. Did you know about this? I'm just learning about it myself, I replied. What exactly are they claiming? Morrison Enterprises covered up a major breach that exposed client encryption keys. If true, it's a compliance nightmare. My mind raced. Client encryption keys were the crown jewels of our security business, the digital signatures that validated our clients' most sensitive transactions. A compromise would be catastrophic, both for the affected clients and for our reputation. Get the security team together, I instructed. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Rajiv? Find Veronica. If this happened, she might know about it. Caroline looked at me questioningly. Nathan's executive assistant for the past 3 years, I explained. If there was a breach and a cover-up, she would have been involved in the response. But she's no longer with the company, Caroline pointed out. Why would she help? Because I'm the only thing standing between her and potential criminal charges for her role in Nathan's financial schemes, I replied grimly. She'll help. By the time we reached Morrison Enterprises, I had already received calls from Tubordi, members and Marcus Westfield, all asking about the rumored security breach. Nathan's strategy was working, creating doubt about my leadership just as I was establishing control. The executive conference room was already filled with our cybersecurity team, legal counsel, and senior engineers when I arrived. Their tense expressions confirmed my fears. This wasn't just a malicious rumor. What do we know? I asked, taking my seat at the head of the table. Our chief security officer, Alan Takeda, cleared his throat. There was an incident approximately 7 months ago, a sophisticated intrusion targeting our client key management system. And I wasn't informed? I asked incredulously. Alan looked uncomfortable. Mr. Morrison instructed that information be compartmentalized. Only he and a small response team were fully briefed. Was there actual data exposure? Based on our investigation at the time, no. The intrusion was detected before any keys were compromised. But what? Alan hesitated. The investigation was limited. Mr. Morrison insisted on handling it personally with outside consultants, rather than following our standard incident response procedures. The implications were staggering. If Nathan had deliberately circumvented proper security protocols, potentially leaving our clients vulnerable while falsely assuring them their data was secure, I need everything, I said firmly. Every log, every report, every email about this incident. And I need to know exactly what clients were potentially affected. As the team dispersed to gather information, I turned to Caroline. This is what Nathan meant. He's trying to force my hand with this threat of exposure. It's a desperate move, she agreed, but potentially effective if not handled correctly. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. The TechWire. Story is just the beginning. Call me if you want to discuss terms. And Nathan had just escalated our private corporate battle into a potential industry-wide scandal, and he was holding our company's reputation hostage. I deleted the message and looked up at my assembled team. Let's get ahead of this. Full transparency, full accountability. We investigate thoroughly, disclose appropriately, and fix whatever needs fixing. Nathan thinks this is his trump card, but he's forgetting something important. What's that? Caroline asked. I built our security systems. If anyone can verify their integrity and repair any damage, it's me. I straightened my shoulders. Nathan may have started this fire, but I'm going to be the one to put it out. The next 12 hours were the most intense of my professional life. Our cybersecurity teams worked through the night, combing through logs and records to determine the exact nature of the security incident Nathan had concealed. By 3 a.m., fueled by endless coffee and determination, we had assembled a clear picture of what happened, and it was both better and worse than I'd feared. It was a sophisticated attack targeting our key vault system, Alan explained, pointing to network diagrams on the conference room screen. But our perimeter defenses detected the intrusion before any client keys were compromised. So, no actual data breach? I asked, hope rising. That's where it gets complicated, Alan continued, his expression grim. After the initial detection, Nathan took over the investigation personally. He brought in outside consultants who weren't familiar with our systems, bypassed standard protocols, and created a secondary containment team that excluded most of our security staff. Rajiv looked up from his notes. From a legal perspective, that's deeply problematic. If his unauthorized approach missed something or failed to properly mitigate the threat. Exactly, Alan nodded. We can't definitively state there was no compromise because the investigation wasn't thorough. Nathan prioritized keeping the incident quiet over comprehensive security. I massaged my temples, feeling a headache building. So we have to assume the worst-case scenario. From a disclosure and remediation standpoint, yes, Rajiv agreed. We need to proceed as if client data may have been exposed. Dawn was breaking when we finalized our response plan. Unlike Nathan's cover-up, we would address this head-on. Full disclosure to affected clients, a comprehensive security review, and transparent communication with regulators. TechWire's deadline is noon, I reminded the team. We need to get ahead of this. The statement is ready, Caroline said, sliding a document across the table. Strong but measured. We acknowledge the incident, outline our response, and emphasize our commitment to transparency. I reviewed it quickly. This is good. Also, prepare personalized communications for our top 20 clients. I want to call each of them personally, before this hits the news. As the team dispersed to implement our plan, my phone buzzed with an incoming text from Nathan. Ready to discuss reasonable terms yet? The audacity was stunning. He had deliberately endangered our client's security, covered it up, and now was using the revelation as leverage. I deleted the message without responding. By 9 a.m., I had spoken with 15 of our major clients. The conversations were difficult but productive. Most appreciated the transparency and proactive approach, though a few expressed understandable concern. Marcus Westfield was particularly supportive. This kind of thing happens in our industry, he said after I'd explained the situation. What matters is how you handle it. Nathan's approach was irresponsible. Yours is exactly what I'd hoped for from a security partner. As noon approached, my assistant appeared at my office door. Ms. Chen, Michael Chen from the Wall Street Journal is here for your interview. In the chaos of the security incident, I'd completely forgotten our scheduled interview. Tell him I need to reschedule. He says it's urgent, something about helping with the TechWire situation. That caught my attention. Send him in. Michael entered looking uncharacteristically serious. You've had a busy night, he observed, taking in my disheveled appearance. That's putting it mildly. I'm sorry, but I need to postpone our interview. We're managing a situation. The alleged security breach, he said, not a question. That's why I'm here. Dana Lawson is a colleague. She let me know about the story. They're running. I straightened in my chair. Did Nathan plant this story with TechWire? Not directly, Michael replied. But the source's information came through channels connected to him. It's a deliberate attempt to destabilize your leadership. We've prepared a statement acknowledging the incident and outlining our response, I said. TechWire's deadline is noon. Michael glanced at his watch, which gives us about an hour. Here's my proposal. Give me the exclusive on the full story. Nathan's cover-up, your discovery, and your transparent response. I can have it published simultaneously with TechWire's piece, providing context that will blunt their impact. I studied him carefully. Why would you help me like this? 3 reasons, he replied without hesitation. First, it's a great story. Second, I believe in journalistic integrity. What Nathan's doing is manipulation, not whistleblowing. And third, he paused. I've always thought you were the real brains behind Morrison Enterprises. This confirms it. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. You'll have complete access to our security team and the documentation of both the incident and Nathan's inadequate response. But I need to review the article before publication. Fair enough, Michael agreed. Let's get started. The next hour was a blur of activity as Michael interviewed key team members and reviewed our findings. His questions were incisive, quickly cutting to the heart of the matter. Nathan had prioritized reputation over security, potentially putting clients at risk. At 11:55, Michael sent his completed article to his editor with me copied. The headline was perfect. Morrison Enterprises takes proactive approach to security after former CEO's cover-up. At noon exactly, both stories broke. TechWire's piece led with the explosive revelation of a potential breach, but the narrative quickly shifted as Michael's more comprehensive article gained traction, highlighting my transparent response in contrast to Nathan's secretive approach. By early afternoon, industry reaction was coalescing in our favor. The stock had dipped initially but stabilized as analysts praised the company's proactive security response. Several competitors even faced uncomfortable questions about their own disclosure practices. "You turned it around," Caroline said admiringly as we monitored the coverage. "Nathan thought this would destroy you, but you've actually strengthened your position." "Not without cost," I reminded her. "We'll still need a complete security audit, client reassurances, and regulatory scrutiny." My phone rang. Rajiv with an update from our ongoing work with the SEC. "The investigators are focusing heavily on Nathan's actions now," he reported, "particularly the deliberate concealment of the security incident. It's shifting their entire perspective on the case." Another call came in immediately after, one of our board members. "Rebecca, the board is unanimously impressed with your handling of today's situation. We're prepared to remove the acting from your CEO title, effective immediately, if we are willing." The offer caught me by surprise. "Thank you. I accept." As I ended the call, my assistant appeared again. "Ms. Chen, there's someone here to see you. She says it's important." Veronica stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined. I hadn't seen her since our conversation earlier in the week. "I heard about the security incident," she said without preamble. "I have information you need." I gestured for her to sit. "What kind of information?" "Documentation," she replied, placing a flash drive on my desk. "After you and I spoke, I realized Nathan might use the security breach against you. I copied these files before leaving. They show Nathan explicitly ordering the security team to limit their investigation and conceal findings from the board, and from you specifically." I stared at the flash drive. "Why are you giving me this?" Veronica met my gaze directly. "Because what he did was wrong, and because—" She hesitated. "I owe you that much, at least." After she left, I provided the new evidence to our legal team, further strengthening our position against Nathan. His attempt to weaponize the security incident had backfired spectacularly, accelerating his downfall instead of mine. That evening, exhausted but triumphant, I finally returned to my apartment to find Alicia waiting with takeout food and wine. "I've been following the news all day," she said, giving me a fierce hug. "You were magnificent." "I had help," I admitted, collapsing onto the couch. "A lot of help." "But you led," she insisted, pouring wine for both of us. "That's what real leaders do. They bring out the best in their team during a crisis." My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Nathan's lawyer called. They want to reopen settlement discussions tomorrow, with more reasonable terms. I smiled, showing the message to Alicia, who raised her glass in a toast. "To my brilliant sister, who just beat her ex-husband at his own game." "The game isn't over yet," I cautioned, though I couldn't help returning her smile. "But I think the momentum has shifted decisively." For the first time since discovering Nathan's betrayal, I felt not just angry or determined, but genuinely confident. He had thrown everything he had at me: legal challenges, media manipulation, even corporate sabotage. And I was still standing. More than standing, I was thriving. Nathan had underestimated me from the beginning, gradually pushing me into the shadows because he couldn't bear sharing the spotlight. That had been his critical mistake. In the shadows, I had learned, observed, and prepared. And when the moment came to step back into the light, I was ready. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a proper security audit, rebuilding client trust, the ongoing SEC investigation. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor this victory, however. Temporary it might be. You know what Dad would say right now, Alicia mused, refilling our glasses. I laughed, already knowing the answer. The best revenge is massive success, we finished together, clinking our glasses in the quiet of my apartment, while somewhere across town, Nathan was learning that lesson the hard way. The new settlement meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at our corporate offices, my territory this time, a subtle but important shift in power dynamics. Richard Price arrived 15 minutes early, looking considerably more composed than Nathan had been at our previous meeting. Ms. Chen, he said, extending his hand as Caroline led him into my office. Congratulations on your permanent appointment. As CEO? Thank you, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Will Mr. Morrison be joining us today? A flash of discomfort crossed Richard's face. No. He's authorized me to negotiate on his behalf. I exchanged glances with Caroline. Nathan's absence was telling. Either he couldn't face me after his failed attempt to sabotage my leadership, or he was planning something else entirely. Very well, I said, gesturing toward the conference table. Let's discuss these more reasonable terms you mentioned. Richard opened his briefcase and withdrew a slim document. Mr. Morrison is prepared to fully withdraw all legal challenges to his termination and transfer all patent rights to the company in exchange for 3 conditions. He slid the document across to me. I scanned it quickly, raising an eyebrow at the revised demands. While significantly reduced from the previous offer, they were still substantial. A $3 million severance payment, a non-disparagement agreement, from all company executives and public recognition of Nathan's role as founding CEO in all corporate materials. $3 million is still excessive given the financial improprieties, Caroline observed. Richard's expression remained professionally neutral. My client views it as compensation for his years building the company and his intellectual contributions to its success. And the founding CEO title? A matter of legacy, Richard replied. Mr. Morrison's primary concern at this point is his reputation in the industry. I considered the terms carefully. The money was manageable, a small price to pay for a clean break. The non-disparagement clause was standard and wouldn't prevent us from cooperating with regulatory investigations. The title issue was largely symbolic, though it irked me that Nathan was still trying to claim primary credit for our joint creation. We can agree to these terms with 2 modifications, I said finally. First, the severance payment will be contingent on the SEC investigation finding no evidence of criminal behavior on Mr. Morrison's part. Second, company materials will recognize both of us as co-founders, not just Nathan as founding CEO. Richard hesitated. My client was very specific about the founding CEO designation. Then your client can explain to the SEC why he concealed a security breach from shareholders, clients, and regulators, I replied evenly. The co-founder's designation is non-negotiable. After a moment's consideration, Richard nodded. I believe I can persuade him to accept those terms. We'll draw up the revised agreement today. Excellent, Caroline said. We'll review it promptly. As Richard prepared to leave, curiosity got the better of me. How is Nathan, really? Richard paused, seeming to weigh his response. Between us, not well. The security breach revelation hit him hard. He genuinely believed his approach was protecting the company. By hiding potential vulnerabilities from our clients? By excluding our own security team from the investigation? Richard sighed. I didn't say his belief was rational. Nathan has always had a particular way of viewing the world. One where his actions are always justified, regardless of consequences. That much was certainly true. Throughout our marriage, Nathan had displayed an uncanny ability to rationalize his behavior, no matter how questionable. It was part of what made him successful in business, and ultimately disastrous as a husband and partner. After Richard departed, Caroline looked at me questioningly. Are you sure about the co-founder's designation? We could push for sole credit given everything that's happened. I shook my head. I don't need to erase Nathan from the company's history to secure my place in it. The truth is, we did build it. Together, even if he later tried to push me out. Very magnanimous, Caroline observed. Not really, I replied with a small smile. Being the bigger person while still getting everything I want feels pretty satisfying, actually. By late afternoon, Richard had returned with the revised settlement agreement incorporating my changes. Nathan had apparently accepted the terms without further argument, a surprising capitulation that suggested just how desperate he was to end the public spectacle of our corporate divorce. As I signed the agreement, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The battle with Nathan was effectively over. Now I could focus entirely on rebuilding client trust and moving Morrison Enterprises forward. I think this calls for a celebration, Caroline suggested as we filed the final paperwork. Dinner tonight? I can invite the executive team. Perfect, I agreed. But first, I need to make an announcement to the staff. They've been living with this uncertainty for too long. At 4 p.m., I gathered the employees for an all-hands meeting. Standing at the podium, looking out at the people who had weathered this storm alongside me, I felt a surge of gratitude and responsibility. Thank you all for coming, I began. I'm pleased to announce that the leadership transition is now complete. Nathan Morrison has withdrawn all challenges to the board's decision, and I have accepted the position of permanent CEO. A spontaneous round of applause broke out, catching me by surprise. These were people who had worked under Nathan for years, yet many seemed genuinely pleased with the change in leadership. Moving forward, our priorities are clear, I continued, when the applause subsided. Completing our comprehensive security audit, rebuilding trust with our clients, and developing the innovative solutions that have always been at the heart of our company. After the announcement, several long-time employees approached to offer congratulations and support. Their validation meant more than any corporate title or settlement term could. As I prepared to leave for the celebration dinner, my assistant handed me a small package that had just been delivered. This came for you, Ms. Chen. Security has cleared. Inside was a single chess piece, a white queen, intact this time, and a handwritten note. Checkmate. Well played. And I studied the piece thoughtfully before placing it on my desk. Unlike the broken queen he'd sent before, this one stood tall and unblemished. A final acknowledgement of defeat, perhaps. Or maybe something more complex, a reluctant recognition of my rightful place. Either way, the game was over. And unlike chess, where victory means the other player's king is trapped, this win has set us both free. 3 months later, Morrison Enterprises had not only weathered the storm, but emerged stronger. Our comprehensive security audit had reassured clients of our commitment to their data protection. The Westfield contract was proceeding smoothly, opening doors to new government and enterprise partnerships. Most importantly, the company culture was transforming, more collaborative, more transparent, and more innovative than it had been under Nathan's leadership. I had just wrapped up our quarterly board meeting, where we'd reported a surprising 12% revenue growth despite the recent turbulence. The board members were visibly impressed, particularly Helen Winters, who had pulled me aside afterward. I've been on this board for 7 years, she said, and I've never seen the company this energized. You've done in 3 months what Nathan couldn't accomplish in 3 years. Her words were validating, but the real satisfaction came from seeing my vision for the company taking shape. We had restructured our research and development teams, giving talented engineers more autonomy and credit for their innovations. We'd implemented a more generous parental leave policy and flexible work arrangements. And we'd launched a mentorship program specifically designed to support women in tech. These changes weren't just feel-good initiatives. They were attracting top talent in a competitive industry. 3 senior developers who had left during Nathan's tenure had returned, bringing valuable expertise back into the fold. As I packed up my materials from the board meeting, My phone buzzed with a text from Michael Chen. "Have you seen the latest TechCrunch article?" I hadn't. Between running the company and finalizing my divorce, I'd been too busy to keep up with industry news. I quickly pulled up the site and found the headline, "Former Morrison CEO Nathan Morrison joins venture capital firm Altitude Partners." So, Nathan had landed on his feet after all. I wasn't surprised. The tech industry had a short memory, and his networking skills had always been exceptional. According to the article, he would be focusing on early-stage security startups, leveraging his extensive experience in the cybersecurity sector. I smiled wryly at the spin. Nathan had certainly gained extensive experience in security, mainly in what not to do when faced with a breach. But I felt no desire to publicly correct the record. Our settlement's non-disparagement clause worked both ways, and more importantly, I had moved beyond the need to define myself in opposition to Nathan. My assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Chen, Veronica Peterson is here to see you." That was unexpected. I hadn't spoken to Veronica since she'd provided the evidence about Nathan's security cover-up. "Send her in," I said, curious about what had prompted this visit. Veronica entered, looking markedly different from the polished, slightly artificial woman who had been at Nathan's side. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a professional but understated outfit. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her usual confidence tempered with what appeared to be genuine humility. "I won't take much of your time." "What can I do for you, Veronica?" She placed an envelope on my desk. "I wanted to deliver this in person. It's a final report I compiled on all the questionable financial activities I observed during my time with Nathan. Most of it you already know, but there are a few details that might be relevant to your ongoing SEC compliance." I picked up the envelope, surprised by this voluntary disclosure. "Why now?" "I'm leaving the city," she explained. "Starting fresh somewhere new. But before I go, I want to make sure I set things right as much as possible." Her candor was unexpected. "I appreciate that. Have you found a new position?" "Yes, though not in tech." A small smile crossed her face. "I'm going to work for a nonprofit in Seattle. Lower salary, but better for my soul, I think." I nodded, understanding the desire for a clean slate. "I wish you well, Veronica." She hesitated, then added, "I saw the article about Nathan's new job. Thought you should know he tried to bring me with him, offer a substantial salary. But you declined." "Some lessons only need to be learned once," she replied simply. "Besides, Altitude Partners has a reputation for cutting corners. Not the fresh start I'm looking for." After Veronica left, I sat reflecting on how completely my life had transformed in just a few months. From being gradually sidelined in my own company to taking full control. From a marriage built on partnership that had devolved into betrayal to a new independence I was growing to cherish. That evening, I met Alicia for dinner at our favorite restaurant before her flight back to London. She had extended her stay to support me through the transition, but was eager to return to her gallery and the British architect who had been patiently waiting. "So, Nathan's back in the game," she remarked as we settled into our table. "Does that bother you? Honestly?" "No," I replied, surprising myself with how true it was. "He'll always be part of this industry, just as he'll always be part of my history. But neither of those facts define my future." Alicia raised her glass. "To new chapters, then." "New chapters," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. As we enjoyed our meal, I found myself genuinely curious about what lay ahead. The company was thriving under my leadership. My personal life, which had been consumed by the corporate battle, was finally opening up to new possibilities. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," Alicia said as we finished dessert. "With everything settled, have you thought about changing the company name? Morrison Enterprises still carries his name." I had considered it briefly but dismissed the idea. The company's reputation and brand equity are built around that name. Besides, it was my name too, for 15 years. But not anymore, she pointed out. True, I acknowledged. But I've reclaimed everything else about the company that matters. The name is just letters on a building. What mattered more than the name was what we stood for: innovation, integrity, and inclusivity. Those values were being embedded into the company culture in ways that would outlast any individual leader, myself included. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Alicia linked her arm through mine. You know what I'm most proud of? That you never let him make you bitter. You fought back, you won, but you didn't let it change who you are. Her observation touched me deeply. The past months had certainly tested me, pushing me to find strength and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. But through it all, I had tried to stay true to my core values, even when making the hard decisions that leadership required. That might be the real victory, I said softly. Above us, the city lights glimmered against the darkening sky, much like the future ahead, bright with possibility, vast with potential, and finally, undeniably mine to shape. 6 months after taking control of Morrison Enterprises, I found myself in a position I never would have anticipated during those first difficult days, being named one of the 50 most influential women in technology by Innovation Quarterly. The photo shoot in my office had just wrapped up, and the interviewer, a sharp-minded woman named Elaine, was asking her final questions. Looking back at everything that's happened, what would you say was the turning point? She asked, her recorder capturing my response. I considered this carefully. It wasn't the boardroom confrontation or winning the legal battle. The real turning point came earlier, the moment I stopped seeing myself through Nathan's eyes and started recognizing my own value again. That's powerful, Elaine noted. Many women in similar situations never reach that point. I was fortunate to have support, I acknowledged, thinking of Alicia, Caroline, and the many colleagues who had stood by me. But ultimately, it was a choice I had to make for myself. After the interview concluded, I walked to the window of my office, gazing out at the cityscape below. The company had just closed its most successful quarter in history. Our stock had risen 22% since I'd taken over. The security enhancements we'd implemented after the breach incident were now being licensed as a standalone product to other firms, creating an entirely new revenue stream. Professional success aside, my personal transformation had been equally significant. The divorce was finalized, my maiden name legally restored. The loft that had initially felt like a temporary refuge now truly felt like home, decorated to my taste without compromise. I'd even started dating again, cautiously, selectively, allowing myself to explore connections based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Chen, Mr. Westfield is here for your lunch meeting. Send him in, please. Marcus entered with his usual commanding presence, though I noticed him taking in the office changes with approval. Gone was Nathan's sterile minimalism, replaced by a warmer aesthetic that balanced professionalism with personality. Art from female artists on the walls, comfortable seating for collaborative discussions, and large whiteboards for spontaneous brainstorming. Rebecca, he greeted me warmly. The place looks different. Better. Thank you. It reflects how we work now. More collaborative, less hierarchical. Over lunch in the executive dining room, Marcus and I discussed the next phase of our partnership, integrating our security solutions more deeply into Westfield's new line of smart home devices. My technical team was skeptical when we first brought this to them, Marcus admitted. They'd had difficult experiences working with Nathan's engineers in the past, but they've been singing your team's praises these last few months. We've worked hard to change the culture, I explained. Engineers who create solutions together should get equal credit. No more top-down attribution. As our meeting concluded, Marcus hesitated slightly before speaking again. I ran into Nathan at a funding event last week. I kept my expression neutral, though I was curious. Oh? He asked about you, actually. Wanted to know how our partnership was progressing. And what did you tell him? Marcus smiled. The truth. That Morrison Enterprises under your leadership has become our most valuable technology partner. I appreciated his straightforward response. Nathan will always be interested in what we're doing here. It's natural. He seemed different, Marcus observed. Less imperious. Mentioned he was doing some personal growth work, whatever that means. The idea of Nathan engaged in genuine self-reflection was difficult to imagine, but not impossible. Perhaps his fall from grace had prompted some real introspection. Or maybe it was just another calculated reinvention. Either way, it was no longer my concern. That evening, I had dinner plans with Michael Chen, whose exclusive article during the security breach crisis had blossomed into a friendship that was gradually evolving into something more. His journalistic integrity and intelligence had impressed me from the beginning, but it was his genuine interest in who I was beyond the corporate story that had drawn me to him personally. We met at a small Italian restaurant far from the usual tech industry haunts. Michael was already seated, looking relaxed in casual clothes rather than his typical professional attire. Congratulations on the Innovation Quarterly profile, he said as I joined him. Though they barely scratched the surface of what you've accomplished. Maybe that's because you've set my media expectations too high, I teased. Not every journalist does months of background research before an interview. Professional thoroughness, he protested with a smile. Is that what you call it? I thought you were just looking for any excuse to see me again after that first Wall Street Journal interview. That too, he admitted, raising his glass. To investigative persistence. As we enjoyed our meal, Michael shared stories from his current project, an in-depth series on ethical challenges in technology. I found myself relaxing completely in his company, something that had become increasingly rare in the upper echelons of corporate leadership, where every conversation seemed to have strategic underpinnings. I have news, he said as we shared dessert. The technology editor position at the Journal, they offered it to me yesterday. Michael, that's wonderful. I reached across to squeeze his hand. You've wanted that for years. There's a catch, he continued. It would mean relocating to their San Francisco office. The implications hung in the air between us. Whatever was developing between us would face the challenge of distance or a significant decision from one of us. When would you need to decide? I asked carefully. 2 weeks, he replied. I wanted to talk to you first. See where your head is at about us. It was a fair question. We'd been taking things slowly, both aware of the potential complications, given his career covering the tech industry and my position within it. I care about you, I said honestly. More than I expected to, especially after everything with Nathan. But I also know how important this opportunity is for your career. I wouldn't want you to turn it down because of me. And I wouldn't want to walk away from something real between us for a job, even a great one, he replied. I guess what I'm asking is, are we building something worth fighting for here? The question touched something deep within me. After rebuilding my professional life from the ashes of betrayal, was I ready to invest emotionally in a relationship that might require more compromise and vulnerability? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a message from Caroline. Call me when you can. Major development with Axiom. I'm sorry, I said, showing Michael the message. This might be important. Go ahead. He nodded understandingly. I stepped outside to call Caroline, wondering what could be urgent enough to interrupt my evening. Her news was stunning. Axiom is being investigated for corporate espionage, she explained quickly. Federal agents raided their offices today. The CEO was just taken into custody. What does this have to do with us? They allegedly stole proprietary code from multiple competitors, including us, Rebecca. During that security breach, Nathan covered up. The FBI wants to speak with you tomorrow as a potential victim of their theft. As I ended the call and returned to the table, I realized that the final chapter of the Nathan saga wasn't quite closed after all. But this time, I wasn't facing it as a betrayed wife or an underestimated partner. I was facing it as CEO Rebecca Chen, firmly in command of both my company and my future. The FBI investigation into Axiom's corporate espionage unfolded rapidly over the next few weeks. I spent hours with federal agents, detailing our security systems and the breach Nathan had concealed. According to evidence they'd uncovered, Axiom had indeed compromised our systems during that incident, extracting portions of our proprietary code. We believe Mr. Morrison was unaware of the successful extraction, Special Agent Harding explained during one of our meetings. His cover-up appears motivated by reputational concerns rather than active collusion with Axiom. This revelation was oddly comforting. Nathan had been negligent, arrogant, and deceptive, but he hadn't deliberately sold out our technology. His flaws were serious but stopped short of outright corporate treason. What was less comforting was learning how close Nathan had actually come to selling our core technology to Axiom before I'd taken control of the company. Email records recovered in the FBI raid showed negotiations far more advanced than we'd initially believed. So if I hadn't intervened when I did, I began. Based on this timeline, Agent Harding said, tapping the documents spread across my conference table, Morrison Enterprises would likely have been gutted within 3 months. Your core technology transferred, your client base vulnerable, your competitive edge eliminated. The realization sent a chill through me. My timing hadn't just been good, it had been essential. The company I'd co-founded, the innovations I'd helped create, the livelihoods of hundreds of employees, all had balanced on a knife's edge. As the investigation progressed, I received an unexpected call from Richard Price, Nathan's attorney. Ms. Chen, he began formally, I'm calling because my client has been asked to provide testimony regarding his interactions with Axiom. He's cooperating fully with the investigation, but he's requested a meeting with you beforehand. A meeting? Why? Richard hesitated. He feels there are things he needs to explain personally, context that might be important. My instinct was to refuse. What could Nathan possibly say that would matter now? But curiosity won out. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. at my office, I decided. Tell him he has 30 minutes. I informed Caroline and our security team about the meeting. Caroline insisted on being present, concerned about potential legal implications. This could be another manipulation tactic, she warned. Don't let your guard down. Nathan arrived precisely at 8 a.m. the next day. As security escorted him to my office, I was struck by how different he appeared from the polished executive I'd been married to for 15 years. He looked thinner, his designer suit hanging slightly loose, his once perfect hair now flecked with more gray than I remembered. Rebecca, he said as he entered, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Thank you for seeing me. Caroline sat beside me, a legal pad ready, her expression professionally neutral but watchful. You requested this meeting, I said, not unkindly but maintaining formal distance. I'm listening. Nathan sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly on the table between us. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with where to begin. I've been working with a therapist, he finally said, the admission clearly difficult for him. Part of the process is making amends where possible. Not for forgiveness, I don't expect that, but for accountability. I remained silent, waiting. The FBI has probably told you I wasn't actively colluding with Axiom during the breach, he continued, but that doesn't excuse what I did. The cover-up, the inadequate response, it was inexcusable. I put this company, our company, at risk because I couldn't admit a mistake. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you deserve to hear it directly from me. And because when I testify about my dealings with Axiom, I want to be completely honest about my failures. That includes acknowledging that I nearly destroyed what we built together out of pure ego. The admission was surprising in its candor. Nathan had never been one to acknowledge weakness or error. Whatever personal growth work Marcus had mentioned seemed to be having an impact. Your actions endangered our clients' data and our company's future, I said. But I appreciate your honesty now. Nathan nodded, accepting the measured response. There's something else you should know. The negotiations with Axiom. They approached me initially because they believed I was the vulnerable one, the partner who could be turned against the company's interests. Why would they think that? Because in industry circles, it was an open secret that I took credit for your innovations. His gaze dropped momentarily. They'd done their research. They knew the foundational algorithms were your work, not mine. They specifically targeted me because they recognized I'd prioritize my ego over the company's well-being. The admission hung in the air between us. After years of Nathan subtly and not so subtly claiming credit for my work, hearing him acknowledge the truth was vindicating, but also strangely hollow. The recognition came too late to save our partnership, our marriage, or the years I'd spent, doubting my own value. I appreciate your candor, I said finally. It will help the investigation. Nathan looked as though he wanted to say more, perhaps something more personal, but thought better of it. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. This contains all my notes and recollections of meetings with Axiom, including conversations not documented in emails. It might help your security team understand exactly what was potentially compromised. As the meeting concluded and security prepared to escort Nathan out, he paused at the door. You've done remarkable things with the company, Rebecca. Better than I ever did. After he left, Caroline looked at me questioningly. That was unexpectedly. I finished for her. But helpful for the case? And for you? She asked perceptively. I considered the question. Closure, maybe. Of a kind I didn't know I needed. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. The Axiom case expanded, revealing a pattern of corporate espionage targeting multiple companies in our sector. Nathan's testimony proved crucial in building the government's case, earning him some measure of redemption in industry circles. Meanwhile, Morrison Enterprises continued to thrive under my leadership. We launched a new security product built specifically to counter the kind of breaches Axiom had executed, turning our painful experience into a market advantage. Our client base expanded, our stock price climbed, and our reputation as an innovation leader solidified. On a personal level, I faced the decision about Michael's potential move to San Francisco. After much reflection, I surprised myself by suggesting a third option. Morrison Enterprises has been considering opening a West Coast office for months, I told him over dinner at my loft. It makes strategic sense for us to have a presence in Silicon Valley. I could split my time between coasts, at least initially. Michael's eyes lit up. You'd consider that? I would, I confirmed. Not just for us, though that's a significant factor. It's actually a smart business move we've been contemplating anyway. The fearsome CEO Rebecca Chen making a life decision that benefits both her company and her personal happiness? Revolutionary concept, he teased. I'm learning that success doesn't have to come at the expense of personal fulfillment, I replied. That was Nathan's model, not mine. 1 year to the day after I had watched Nathan and Veronica dining together at that upscale restaurant, planning their future while I plotted my corporate takeover, I stood on stage at the National Women in Technology Conference, delivering the keynote address. Resilience isn't just about surviving difficulty, I told the audience of primarily female technology leaders and aspiring professionals. It's about reclaiming your narrative when others have tried to write you out of it. It's about recognizing your value when others have tried to diminish it. From my vantage point on stage, I could see Alicia in the front row, having flown in from London specifically for this event. Michael sat beside her, his proud smile warming me even from a distance. Representatives from Morrison Enterprises filled several tables, including some of our longest-serving employees who had witnessed the company's entire evolution. The technology industry often celebrates disruption, I continued. But true innovation isn't just about disrupting markets. Sometimes it's about disrupting expectations, challenging assumptions about who belongs at the table and whose contributions matter. As I concluded my speech to enthusiastic applause, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The path hadn't been straight or easy. It required courage to confront betrayal, strength to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and wisdom to shape something better from the ashes of what was lost. Nathan had left me for his secretary, not knowing I owned 51% of his company. That single fact had given me the leverage to take back control when the moment came. But the true power hadn't resided in legal ownership. It had always been within me, in my knowledge, my resilience, and my vision for what the company could become. Later that evening, surrounded by friends and colleagues at the reception, I found a quiet moment to step onto the venue's balcony. The city lights sparkled below, reminiscent of the view from my office, but somehow more magnificent from this perspective. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Snuck away to file my story on your speech. Heading home after. Dinner tomorrow. Before the SF trip? I smiled, typing back. Perfect. Looking forward to both. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I noticed a small velvet box that had been placed on the balcony ledge, with a card bearing my name. Opening it, I found a chess piece inside, a white queen, but unlike the ones Nathan had sent, this one was cast in solid platinum, gleaming in the moonlight. The card read simply, "To the most formidable opponent I've ever faced, and the most remarkable leader I've ever known. Your move changed the game for all of us. Thank you." And I held the queen thoughtfully, appreciating the gesture for what it was. Not an attempt at reconciliation or forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of respect, hard-won and well-earned. Then, I tucked both the chess piece and card into my evening bag and returned to the reception, to the company I'd built, the people I cared for, and the future I was creating, one entirely my own. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.